Hi guys, welcome back to the next lesson. So in this lesson, we are going to take a look at user validation. We're going to check for existing users, and we are also going to validate the user's input on the server. So in the last lesson, we didn't do any validation. We could create the user with the same emails and stuff like that. So we need to fix that. We need to make sure that there's not multiple users with the same details. And we need to make sure that what the user's inputting is storable. So let's switch over to our project code. This is where we left off at last time. And to begin this, the first thing I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at preventing multiple users with the same emails from signing up. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new comment to our register route. I'm going to type in a comment of check for existing user. So what we're going to do here is we are going to create a new variable called existing email. And what we're going to do is we're going to query the database. So we're going to do await user. So we're going to check the user collection. We're going to find one. So that basically returns one document that meets our criteria. And our criteria is going to be the email where the email is equal to request.body.email. So we're checking to see whether there is a user in our database with the same email as the one provided in our request. If there is an existing email, so if there is an existing user, we are going to return res.status 400 JSON, and then we're going to open up an object inside that response. Error, there is already a user with this email. Save that. Okay, so if there is an existing email, we want to basically return an error saying, nope, this isn't allowed. There's already a user with this email in the database. However, this at the moment, this check, although it works as a basis, all we're doing is we're checking we're essentially checking the exact input from the user side. For example, if I did test@test.com and did the same email twice, and if it was all lowercase, that would be fine. This would catch it. However, what if I put in say a capital letter in the middle of that input? We're not checking for this. We're just checking for a direct match to the request.body. So I'll show you an example here. So on my database, I've already deleted all of the users. There's no users there. This is inside the dashboard. So I'm going to go to Postman. I'm going to submit the user that I already have stored here. We've provided the email test@test.com mat password. So it's just, now that I've submitted it, it's just returned that to me below. It's quite hard to read all that. It's just returned that to me below. If I click send again, as you'd expect, there is already a user with this email. So that's what we've just written in there. However, we're not doing any case sensitivity checks or anything like that. So what if I did what if I change this to a capital letter at the start? Well, here's the problem then straight away. So technically this email is not actually equal to one that's already stored in the database because it's got a capital letter. See, we don't want that. We need to allow for that. We need to make sure that can't happen. So if I just refresh my database online at the moment, I'm on the dashboard. You see the duplicate one we created. I'm just going to delete that because we don't want that anymore. We want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So what we can do is inside the email field here, I'm just going to open this up to make it nice and readable. We're actually going to use a regex pattern. So we're going to do new reg expression. And we're going to do quotes. We're going to do an up arrow plus request.body.email plus, and then we're going to do a $ inside of quotes. And then we're going to do a comma and then I inside of quotes. So don't worry too much about regular expressions. They're quite complex and I need to get rid of that semicolon. They're quite complex and they take a lot of learning to get used to. What this is essentially doing is saying if there is someone existing on the database with any kind of uppercase, lowercase version of the email we've inputted, it will return it as well. So if I now try and do the same Postman request here, even though it's got a capital letter here, you can see that it has now thrown up an error saying no, that's not allowed. Our regex pattern is, our regex expression is catching that, which is brilliant. So we don't just want to check for that. We also need to check if this is a valid email. We're not doing any validation on what's actually pasted in here. I could technically type in anything in this value field here, and it wouldn't return any issues. We've also got no validation to say if the name is empty. If I don't provide the name, it will still try and store it in the database. We need to add some kind of validation to the data that's sent through to us. We need to check that data before we even try to store it or check for existing emails. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a new folder in the root. That new folder is going to be called validation. And inside this folder of validation, we're going to create a new file called register validation in camelcase.js. So inside this, we're going to basically we're going to create a function that we can pass all of our data, requests to, and that's going to check we're going to basically write a function that checks that all of the data we want present is there. We can do stuff like character limits and whatnot. So to begin with, inside of validation, again, before I actually fill out this file, I'm going to create a new helper function, and that's going to be called isEmpty. So I'm going to create a new file called isEmpty, and this is a nice function I like to use in the majority of my projects. That basically is a function that will check if anything is empty, whether it's an object. It can check whether the object is empty. It can check whether a string is empty. It can check basically any value to check whether there's actually something there. What we're going to do is we're going to do const is empty. We're going to pass in the value to this function, and we're going to do an arrow there. We're not going to open up the curly braces because we're just always returning. And what we're going to do is we're going to check if the value is equal to undefined, or and then we're going to do two pipes to say or value is equal to null, and then we're going to do two more pipes, and we're going to open up some round braces. We're going to do type of value is equal to object. So if the value we're passing into this function is an object, we're going to check whether it has any object.keys, so any object keys. So object.keys value.length is equal to 0, or if type of value is equal to string, we're going to trim that string, so value.trim, and then we're going to check if the length of that is equal to 0 as well. So basically what this does is if we pass anything into this function, it will say if it is empty, it will return true. If it is not empty, it will return false. So we can quickly check that this data is provided, and we'll use that in our validation quite nicely. So we're then going to do module.exports equals isEmpty. So we're going to export that function so that we can use it wherever we want in this application. So let's go back to the register validation, and we're actually going to make use of another package here. This package is called validator. So I'm going to close off the server quickly with Control-C. I'm going to do npm I validator. So I'm going to install validator. Now I'm going to boot up the server again. So npm run server now that that package is installed, and we're going to make use of that. We're going to make use of that package in a minute inside of this register validation function. So I'm going to do const validator equals require validator. What validator does is it provides a load of functions where I can check if an email is valid, check if a string is a certain length and stuff like that. It's got loads of helpful built-in functions for us that we'll make use of during validation. I also want to import my isEmpty function that we just wrote. So I'm going to import that from isEmpty, which is ./isEmpty. Let's save that file there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create our validation function. So const validate register input equals, and we're going to pass in as a parameter data to this function. Then we're going to open up an arrow function. And we're going to create an object called errors. So let errors equal this. So it's going to be an empty object called errors. And what we'll do is if there's any, each time there's an issue with any of the data that's passed to us, we're going to add a new key to this errors object, and we're going to use that on our route to return a relevant error in the response. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to check the email field. So I'm going to open up an if statement. If is empty, So if the email is empty, so if is empty data.email, we're going to pass through data, pass that through in an object. We are going to do errors.email is equal to email field cannot be empty. So we're going to pass that through as our error message. And we're going to do an else if statement. And we're going to make use of validator. So we're going to do a exclamation mark. So if validator dot is email, data.email, we're going to return an error message of errors.email equals email is invalid. Please provide a valid email. And the validator is email function. If I hover over here, it might give me a description. No, it's not giving me a description. That's fine. Validator. So this is the package we just installed. Has a nice function called isEmail. It will basically verify that it is in fact an email address and not just a random word someone's typed in, which is nice. So we're then going to do check password field. And we're going to do if is empty data.password. We're going to do the same as up here. So errors.password equals password field can not be empty. And then we're going to do an else if, and what we're going to do here is we're going to check the length of that password. So if the valid, so we're going to do exclamation mark. So that means if it's not true, we are going to, so we're, if not true, validator dot is length. So then we can pass in the password, so data.password, and then we pass in options. So we do a comma, we open up the object, we do min, and we're going to do a min of 6 characters, and we're going to do a max of 150 characters. So what this basically is saying, this little line here is saying, if the password is not a minimum of 6 characters or is over 150 characters, we're going to throw up this error message, which is, I've just seen a typo here as well, errors.password. Just typed in wrong there. So we're going to type in an error message of password must be between 6 and 150 characters long. So what we're also going to do is we're going to ask the user to provide a confirm password field. So when they're registering, we want them to type in the password twice so that we can make sure that that they're typing in the correct password. And what we're going to do is we're going to check the password. So we're going to check the confirm password field. So we're going to make the user add a confirm password field. So if is empty data.confirm password, we want to return errors.confirm password is equal to confirm password field cannot be empty. I've also got a typo up there. And then if it's not empty, we want to also check that the confirm password field is equal to the password field. So I'm going to do validator equals data.password data.confirm password. And this is basically going to check whether these two, the data.password, the parameters we passed in is data.password and data.confirm password, we're checking that they are equal using the validator.equals function. Otherwise, we're going to throw up a password, an error saying password and confirm password fields must match. And then, so we're doing all of this functionality inside this function, but what we need to do is we need to then return something from the function. And we need to return errors. So we're returning this errors object up here. So if there are any errors, we'll return it. And then we can check is valid. So we're going to check if the input is valid by checking if is empty errors. So if errors is empty, if the object is empty, then that will return true, which means it is valid. If there are errors, it will return false, which tells us that the input is not valid. So we then need to export this function here. So module.exports equals validate register input. Sorry, I typed that way too quickly. Validate register input, which is the name of our function up here. So that's brilliant. So we now save this. We now got a function to check everything that the user inputs. We now need to go back to our root. So we're going to go to auth.js file. And we need to import this function into our file. So const validate register input equals require. And we need to go ... so back a folder into validation and import register validation here. So we're importing our function. And what we're going to do inside of our /register root is we are going to use destructuring to grab the errors. So const errors is valid and is valid from validate register input, which we are going to pass request.body to. So we're passing everything that the user sends us in the request, and then we're basically out of that function, we're getting the errors and whether or not the input is valid. So if it is not valid, what we need to do is return those errors. So we're going to get return res.status 400, telling the user that there's a problem, it's a bad request, there's a problem with the request, and we're going to send in JSON, we're going to send the errors through to the user. Okay, so now that we wired that up, we can actually see the function that we created in practice. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to purposely put in an invalid email. I'm going to purposely not provide a name, and we have not done that confirm password field, so I'd expect to see a few errors. So we've got here, we're not checking the name. We need to verify the name. So we've got errors here. We've got email is invalid. Please provide a valid email. Confirm password field cannot be empty. So we also need to provide that. It's telling us that there's issues with our request. However, if I go back to our function here, you can see that we forgot to check the name. So what I'm going to do is you see this password field here? I'm going to copy this check password field. I'm going to paste this code block, and I'm going to check the name field. So if is empty data.name, we're going to provide an error of errors.name, and then we're going to do name field cannot be empty. And then I'm going to do some length validation on it as well. So I'm going to do data.name, and I'm going to say a minimum amount of 2 characters, and I'm going to say a maximum of, let's say 30 characters. We don't want a really long name being stored in the database. It's important to do validation because otherwise someone could abuse your length of validation. Otherwise someone could abuse your application and try and store a huge amount of letters as their name, for example, and use up more storage, resulting in extra costs and whatnot. So name field, name must be between 2 and 30 characters long. So if I hit submit on that again, I'm going to copy that quickly. So if I go to Postman, if I click submit again, we now see that the name field is not working, so we haven't provided a name there. So if I provide a name here, we should see the name error going away. So the name field has gone. So the email is invalid. So if I put in a valid email, let's say test2@test.com, you can see that the email is valid. And now the only error is the fact that our confirm password field is empty. So if I add a confirm password field, let's say I purposely put in the wrong password as the one above, we should see an error saying password and confirm password fields must match. They don't match. So if we make them match, there we go. We send the request, we complete all of the validation, and now there's no issues storing our data in the database. If we refresh our database, you can see our new user here, and we had to go through all of the validation steps. I'll delete that user for now, seeing as we don't need it, but we went through all the validation steps to create that user, and we know that it is valid. It is valid on the user model. So that pretty much sums up the validation. That's all we need to really cover. So in the next episodes, we'll start looking at properly authorizing on the application, logging in on the user, storing access tokens and things like that, so that the user can use the application as they're an authorized user. Okay, so thanks for watching this lesson, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.